Probably. Oh yeah. All right. I think I'll do the SDF final, and then I'll do the Reflex Canon variant, one after the other, because I think the final is different than the previous final version. But the Reflex Canon, I was like very happy about the Reflex Canon variant as well, and I'm kind of excited to share that one. Ah, here we are at Jemison. Okay. Now, anybody who was like a fan of my previous variant of this probably already noticed one major difference, and that is the length of the middle section. This is going to be incredibly easy to talk about, just because of how much thought I've put into this ship and this design over time. So this is now the very best variant of the SDF-1. Now I've got a slightly different version of this in my sort of famous video, and this is even and actually I made a change to this after making that video. One of the more recent videos I made on this is actually an improvement I came up with for this build, which basically was just this piece here that I'm cursoring over. Well, this piece and the one under it on both sides. So I felt this was a closer match because I could have blue all along the side and on the top, and then white on the other half and on the inside, which most closely resembles the actual ship when it's configured in this position with the reflex cannon appendages separated. All right. So what I did was I made this middle section here one piece longer. Okay. Now there's two 1x1s here, right? But you could have a 2x1 instead, and in fact you should. But just ignore that for the time being. And on the bottom here, I made the bottom part of it longer too by using this particular sloping piece here, which I believe most closely resembles the shape of the bottom part in the art, in all the existing art. Whereas this top piece is very consistently very square and blocky at the end of it. Now, I did this because I made this change, and why I didn't have this in the first iteration of the ship is because of the difficulty in making this thing proportionately as accurate as possible. So, ideally, this ship should be about one block longer than it is. If this thing could be one block longer than it is, everything would be perfect. And what I would do is, if I could make this thing one block longer than it is, instead of one of these that my cursor's over now, I would have two. So like that entire the weapon appendages would be one section longer, and I would just duplicate these right here, because this section is supposed to be proportionally about one piece longer. And if I did that, then everything would be just 100% perfect in every way. But working with the limitations that we have, this is as good as it gets, and this is better than it was before. So prior to these most recent improvements, this is essentially what it looked like on the top. forget about, just pretend this doesn't exist and look at it like that. And then of course I had this, oops, it looked like that. All right. I did like having the gun that close to this cockpit piece because it better hid the fact that it's a cockpit, which has always been my intention, was to hide that this is a cockpit. And the very shape of this piece also hides that it's a cockpit because you can fit it, instead of jutting out forward and being sort of like sticking out like a sore thumb, like, hey, I'm a cockpit. It fits on top of another piece, so it almost looks like a sloping up of the overall shape instead of being like instead of like having some specific purpose, like being the bridge or a cockpit. Because obviously, the actual bridge of this ship, if this was the real ship, would be up here at the very, very top. It would be right in front where my cursor is here, behind these long pipes or antenna. This obviously I tried to mimic antennas with this piece. I wanted this piece to look like the antenna that stick out and backwards from the bridge of the real ship. But anyway, so that was a big change there on the overall shape, and it's a change for the better, having this middle section longer and the bottom part longer. Now, what I want to also mention, something that's different, is these two turrets here that are pointing backwards. I had those pointing forwards and on the side right here. And then I had these ones that are pointing forward on the side. I had them pointing backwards back here. I switched that up for a reason of functionality. However, in hindsight, now that I made that change, I think this more just like the form of it, the way things look, is actually now actually also closer to the art like this, because the turrets that were on the back in the art were basically the biggest turrets that the ship has. And the same can be said for this place on the ship and this place. So this more closely matches and holds true to that theme. And so that left me able to place these disruptors, particle guns, on the side. And so what I did was, I also changed these from turrets to fixed forward, the beam version. Instead of the turreted auto beam, it's just the beam version. Now, to be completely perfectly true to the real ship, these should be turrets, 100%. However, if you want to fly this ship and be more powerful without really sacrificing how things look, because like the turreted version of these guns don't really look like very different from the way this looks right here. So you're not really sacrificing the look of the ship at all. But you know, if you're a stickler for everything being as thematically identical to the real ship as possible, then you would want to have these as turrets as well. But yeah, no, having them not turrets is more powerful because you're able to now control when they shoot better, and you're able to pick what they're shooting. Whereas if it was a turret, obviously they're just firing whatever at whatever they want to fire at, which is an issue, right? These guns on the shoulders here, they have also changed. So before, these were the variants of these things that had a fire rate of 1.5, but now this is the automatic version of these ones that have like a magazine instead of like basically rapid single shots. Now they're firing like very rapid, well, more rapidly. They still fire slow, which is what actually you want, but like a fire rate of 4 is not very fast. It doesn't feel like so fast that it kind of breaks with the theme of the kind of gun that it was. Because obviously on the real ship, these the guns on its shoulders were its actual biggest guns on the entire ship, and they in fact were massively long. They would have been 3 or 4 times as long as these guns are, certainly. But there's no guns in the game that in Starfield that are like that, and these ones here are pretty much the longest looking or symmetrically resembling those guns as much as possible, both in form and function. So these are, I believe, in according to the lore of the SDF-1, those shoulder guns are rail guns. These are Gauss guns, which are essentially like a rail gun, but lacking one mechanism of accelerating the projectile that a rail gun has. These don't use. But it's like it's still using like a magnetic propulsion system, like a that is included in the propulsion system of a railgun. So it's still pretty thematically right on, and everything else about them is as close to the real ship as possible too. Now the reason I picked the auto version of those, and I was very happy with the other version, like the slower firing ones. I didn't need to speed up the fire rate, but the thing is, like, this gun here, this neutron beam, this gun fires more quickly the more power you put into it. So I want to definitely have all the pips into that weapon as I can. But to do that, that means the other weapons on the ship will not be able to have the full amount of power. Unless I was to basically take all the power out of one of the three. And I'm not going to do that, obviously, because that's too much of a gimp. But, so, keeping in mind all your pips are going to be in this weapon, that means the auto version, the magazine version of this particular gun is going to be much stronger, because if I can't have full pips in it, like that slower firing version, if you don't have full pips in it, you're really hurting its DPS. But if it's the magazine version, you're not hurting its DPS at all. And in fact, the magazine version's DPS is already higher. Even if you were using the slower firing one with full pips, the magazine's version's DPS is higher than that by default, until you have to reload, right? And then there's a question about what's how much which gun will have done more damage over a certain amount of time. But you should be able to actually blow up a ship before you run out of the magazine charges, especially when the other guns that are going to be hitting that ship are 4 of these neutron beams, which crush, and then you're going to have 2 forward facing turrets that also use magazines, so they're doing good DPS. You could even make the frontal DPS stronger if you rotated these turrets here to face forward as well. Or you could make these railgun weapons, you could make them all forward mounted, the auto version of the railgun, not a turret, and that would even make it even stronger yet again. But I find that the non-turreted versions of these particular guns do look quite a bit different when they're not a turret, and in a way that sort of took away from staying true to the overall theme, that the way the ship is supposed to look, took away from that a bit too much, more than I was willing to sacrifice. So yeah, so I kept them the way that is too. And on top of that, these particular weapons, these railguns here, they have a pretty shitty range, so they're really not going to be doing a lot of damage anyway because of that. Because you're going to be doing a lot of damage from outside the range with these other weapons. And by the way, these particular shoulder weapons here, it says it has a range of 1500. but they're actually way longer than that. I don't even know if they have a maximum range. Actually, there's something about these weapons that are ballistics that, you know, I'm pretty sure what they shoot just continues on forever. Now, they don't do as much damage as they would if they were inside that range. But I think the reason for that is as you get further away, like some of the guns are going to be missing, whereas other ones will hit. As opposed to like just the projectiles doing less damage, which may also be the case. But um, the main point I'm trying to make though here is like when it comes to these particular guns is that you can hit well outside 1500 with these, and you can be hitting at the same time as you're hitting with these babies that have the longest range in the game at 4200. You know, this is with max skills though too, so like keep that in mind. I think by default these things have a range of 4000, and likewise these other weapons are the range would be less unless you have max skills. So yeah. So with that being said about all the weapons, here's some other differences too. On, I forget if this is Prometheus or Daedalus. I'm going to forever mix those two up. But you'll notice that instead of having just another one of these pieces, these square hab pieces on the front section of it, I put this more smooth tapered piece there. Now, I thought long and hard about this one because in the art, this particular seagoing vessel, this particular vessel basically it had very smooth lines going right out to the very front, and it didn't drop straight down, but it was a very steep slope at the front. Now, if I just put one of these habs on the front, that sort of means I have to accept either just a vertical drop as opposed to a slope, or I can take this sort of slope piece and more rounded off than I would like, but less steep than what I would like. And I thought the better of the two was to take the less steep of the two options. And there's another reason why too. So if I didn't make that choice, then essentially the other side here would like the front of it would be pretty much identical to the front of this one. And as we know from the art, the front of this one here, Prometheus or Daedalus, is a very different look than the front of this one. And if I didn't make this choice with the sloping front, they basically would look like this, almost like the same ship. Yeah, the same sort of vessel. Now with the choices I've made, they don't, and that's really good, I think, for the overall aesthetic and staying true to those themes present in the real ship in the art. Now over here on this ship, you see I added this kind of like piece here that kind of juts out a bit on the side. That is an addition as well. That's a new change. Didn't have that before in my older version. And I think this really does a good job of sort of emphasizing that, hey, this is an aircraft carrier, and it's got a big wide flat surface on the top that's not perfectly symmetrical in the ways that an aircraft carrier's top is not perfectly symmetrical. I tried playing around with some other things to sort of like more closely mimic this particular ship in, like, when I say ship, I mean like the Prometheus or Daedalus, whichever one of the two of this is. It is a ship in its own right, if you recall. So that's why I call it ship. But I tried other little things to sort of more closely resemble the top of the aircraft carrier that it was, but because of how close this has to be to the rest of the main ship, there really was nothing more I could do. Um, but this this one addition here was a happy minimum addition that I could throw into it to kind of still improve the overall ship without really compromising any of the other aesthetics. All right, so that's that. All right, but now there's more changes, and this has to do with its function. So I completely swapped out the generator for a tougher generator with way more hull hit points. So this by making this change, what I've done is I've functionally improved the tankiness of this ship by a massive amount. So if you recall, the generator before was right here, right basically it was touching these engines, in front of these engines right here where my cursor was going over. So I took that out and replaced it with halves and put the new one in the front in the middle. Just a second. Okay. So that's there. So that's now I put that there because since I made the decision to make this longer on the top and the bottom and the middle, that meant that there was a larger gap in the middle between these two pieces. So obviously I had the opportunity to fill that up with something. So I put the generator there. Now you may be wondering, what about the fuel? What about the grav drive? Okay, so I'm going to show you where those are now because they're different as well. And of course, like these choices I've made were to put these other pieces. They were made keeping in mind I want to hide these pieces as much as possible so they don't interfere with any of the lines or aesthetic of the ship. So essentially the fuel now comes exclusively from two of these pieces, one on either side, symmetrically placed. Okay, their symmetrical placement has nothing to do with why they're there. It's the symmetry. What does have to do, the reason why they are there is because those are the only places I could put those where they would be hidden. Every other place they're visible from at least one angle to the point where it's, I think, suboptimal to put them anywhere but there. And then here we have the grav drive, and this ship is massive, so it needs the biggest grav drive possible if you want it to make the farthest jumps. If you don't want it to make the farthest jumps, you can put a 1x1 sized grav drive on this thing, and it'll still work. So I took this one. This is one of the strongest ones there is, and it also has one of the most attachment points of other ones. And the real reason I picked this one is because it's got sort of like the most flat surfaces on it, which means it hides itself the best of all the other choices of grav drives. So that's in there. Nicely there. Now, a word about cargo. The cargo pieces are exactly the same, I believe, as the previous versions. It's still just these two 30T Holler cargo holes positioned exactly the way they were on the previous versions. So I'm just going to replace these back where they're supposed to be. I just sort of remembered something I want to make sure it's not different before I move on. Yeah, no, the landing gear on the ship is the same as it was. Landing gear is not an issue on the ship whatsoever because you have 4 of these particular guys, the NG-20 landing gear with a monstrously strong thrust of 4. Most landing gear has a thrust of 1 or 2. Each of those is a thrust of 4, so that's no issue. And of course, I picked these particular landing gears because of their shape and how that mostly resembles, most closely matches the way the chest looks on the SDF-1 in the art. Oh, I almost forgot to say, so another big change cosmetically, one that I'm very, very happy about, is these 2 pieces right here. So if you recall, prior to this version, I had a piece like this, not this particular piece, but one that looks almost identical to it. I think it's a Demos piece. I had that here, and then I had the gun in front of it. Okay, but now I got 2 of these pieces, which are the same piece, only different variants of one another. And this, what this does that I really like, is it maintains the width of what it is on top of with no break. And it doesn't go quite as high as the middle section here, which is exactly the way it's supposed to look. And on top of that, the back of it, the way it sort of like ends abruptly, almost looking like it's a port of some kind or a vent, just perfect with the way it's supposed to look at that on that part of the ship. Because of course these pieces would be attached to the weapon appendage arms, and I believe they're even part of the mechanical functional pieces of the weapon appendages. And I believe everything else is the same. I think I changed the colors a little bit. Yeah, I did. So for this particular ship here, I believe I added blue onto it instead of just being gray, because in a lot of the art, I would say almost all of the art, there is blue on the top of this ship. And the same thing for the aircraft carrier on this side. It is blue on the top in most of the art. So I was actually very happy with that. I was able to add blue on the top and not on the sides. Because if I had to choose, I would make the whole thing gray if I had to make it blue on the side for the aircraft carrier, because it really wasn't like that, and that would, I think, stuck out like a bad thumb in a way, or a sore thumb in a bad way. Sorry. And here, I was able to have the blue in the sections that I want, and in the art, the back section was still gray only, and yeah, everything else, I believe, is the same. Now, what about the interior? The interior did change some. I love showing the ship from the outside. Walking up to it, it's just like, boom. It's a massive ship. You know, obviously with mods you can have much bigger ships, but I was never one to use mods for this game. I just don't believe in them. All right. So entering the ship from the middle bottom, there's only one way to go, and that's straight up. So the first level, you're able to, I believe this is, okay, wait. This would be the, yeah, this is the section of the ship that would, if you're facing forward, if you're inside the ship facing forward, this is on the right. And this is the door that would go out to, like, the battleship, Delos or Prometheus, the one with the docker on it. And this has a 2x1 hab here, all in one. And this input leg is something else. And then there's another hab like it underneath. And we'll go to the other side and check out the aircraft carrier interior. Obviously, the inside is not the scale. It kind of breaks with the immersion, how small it is on the inside versus looking at the outside and pretending it's much bigger than it is. You can't really do that, but it is functional on the inside. So this is the all the way at the end of the aircraft carrier, if you can imagine. Yeah, and then the only way to go from here is up. Not there. Okay, so this is a crew section, and this is the very front middle. Now again, you could do a 2x1 here, make another crew section for even more crew stations. In fact, this is what I probably recommend you do. Actually, you would make that an all-in-one, because I think above this is another crew 2x1. Why wouldn't he grab on there? It's so weird. Jesus. Actually, no, there's no more crew sections there. That's a 1x1. And here we are in the cockpit. As a look from the inside, big ass turret in front of you. And we'll see it take off.
Pressure holding. Take off.
Does it get a sense for how big it is there? It moves too fast for how big it is, because like if it was really that big, you would think it would be moving slower.
Orbit achieved.
But yeah, we are in space. Yeah, that looks quite a bit better. I'm actually surprised I was able to improve the design and make it so I like it, actually, the look of it better. But I did. I didn't intend to. I just kind of came back to the game out of necessity, you might say. My main computer broke down. I couldn't play my normal games, so I was forced to sort of use GeForce Now and play some single player games. And to get a look at the weapons firing, so let's see. That's the long range particle guns. And this is the shoulder Gauss guns. Yeah. That's not too fast. I'm happy with that. At the same time, yeah. And of course, if there was an actual target, the other turrets would be firing too. All right, so that's that. You can almost imagine it transforming. So that's that, and now I'm going to show the same ship, but with one very major difference. And that difference is a functional working reflex cannon. So as you know, every gun on the SDF-1 was insignificant to the point of it might as well not even be there compared to its main gun, which the whole ship was basically just one big gun, the Reflex Canon. And I showcased that obviously in the video I put out, the original video I put out of this ship. But now I've actually built that cannon into this ship. And here, my friends, is what it looks like firing. Three, two, one.
Dad, do you think
So how I was able to accomplish that,
Sure. Everybody likes you.
I have to send out another honorable mention to the ship technician. So the ship technician, I watched a few videos of his when I was playing the game again recently, and one of the biggest takeaways that I got from his videos was what are the actual strongest weapons in the game and why they're the strongest. And basically, I put every single one of the best weapons in the game that you can fit on a ship right down the middle of this thing. So when they fire all at the same time, it looks like the reflex cannon firing. And let me tell you something. This ship, when you do that, it fucking obliterates. No, fucking obliterates everything. If you don't have your difficulty at the absolute high setting, you'll pretty much instantly destroy whatever you're shooting. Like that. Now you do have to be a little bit close to get the full damage of these guns, because like there's well, I should probably just land this thing and then get in and show you what guns they are. So to look at my outpost real quick. Alright, so there's the ship. So you probably already noticed though that I had to take off every single turret on the outside, because obviously, you know, you can't just keep throwing guns on the ship. There's a limited amount of guns you can put on it. So I took off every single gun and I put them all in the middle. All right, let's take some pieces off. Now, you'll also notice that I have this particular piece on the top middle instead of like a 2x1 half, and that's because I needed one to make this fully work to its maximum potential. I needed one more snap point on the bottom. So if I pull this off, you'll see what I mean by there's a snap point on the bottom. See how there's a gun snapped to the bottom there? Yeah. So it's close enough whereby I'm not sweating it. Like the fact that it tapers upwards towards the end, it's not such a big deal to me. It's close enough. This is more about the power than the look as well. Everything else is just beautiful, just like the other ship, the other version of this I just showcased. With the exception, of course, of the turrets are all completely removed, and every gun is in the center middle. So, without further ado, I'll get into these guns. So this weapon configuration is the highest DPS in the game. There's no two ways about it. It's the best of the best. They're not even that hard to get. Basically, to unlock these guns, all you got to do is like one of the first one or two missions of the Vanguard quest line, and that's it. So here's why they're so strong. This gun here is a ballistic gun, and this is a very short range weapon. That's why you got to get close, because of this particular gun system. Look at the power required. Max power 2. That means that you can put 6 of these on your ship. So there's 6, and because there's 6, this weapon system basically does more damage than any other weapon system all together when you have the max number of the weapon on the ship. I mean, when it comes to the hull damage, this thing, there's nothing that can even think about trying to rival it. When it comes to shield damage, it's not the best, but once you get past that shield, the ship is going to be deleted in about half a second with these guns. So there's 6 of those. And then we got this baby here, which you may remember from the Corvette build that I just returned to. This one has a power 4, so there's 3 of these. And then the other gun is, of course, the big fat. Not the big fat. The little skinny, actually. Shit. And this is the other best gun in the game. I believe the way the order it goes is this little skinny gun is number 1. You can correct me if I'm wrong on this. The only thing I'd be wrong about is the order in which that these guns are the best. But these are the 3 best guns in the game. I believe this is number 1 though. This particular skinny gun. And again, this one has a max power of 2, which means you could have 6 of those. So 6 of these mofos, and 3 of these mofos. All jammed in the middle here. Yeah, this is just an unimaginable amount of damage. Now I arranged these things in the middle in a very particular way because, like, when I came up with the concept of this to make the reflex cannon, the color of the weapons firing was important to me because I wanted it to most closely match the art